Thanks for watching the MLS Fantasy Insider. Be sure to check out MLSFantasyBoss.com for more fantasy articles and come back here every Monday to listen to our next round preview. But pause a second. I've got to go run up to help with Toddler right now. So, Ashley, if you want to kick off the interview with Jeff.
I would love to. Everybody loves a Sounders sandwich, so I'm really excited to just have you here, and also, to have had a Sounders player OR1 last year was pretty great. When did you realize that you maybe were about to win or, place OR1 last year? At what point did you feel like, one, you kind of knew it, or two, you thought you had it?
Good question. It's funny. I was sweating decision day because I made a very last minute, like final 2 minutes before games locked decision to pull Suarez out of my lineup.
Hey.
I wasn't thinking about who they were playing. So I think I switched like Suarez start with even remember who the mid was at this point to my bench, and then put Lucho Acosta on the bench and started Kelvin Yeboah. It was
Okay.
like a solid
Yeah.
20 to 25 point like negative swing. And seeing everybody that had Suarez starting was
Yeah.
terrifying. And then you just watch
Uh-huh.
his score climb and climb and climb. And I'm watching Wojo get point after point after point
Mm-hmm.
closer. Um, had just enough of a lead though to hold him off. I think
Yeah.
watching the night games, the Wojo and I were tied all the way until the final two
Yes.
minutes. And the lone score difference that happened was Rusnak picked up a yellow card for embellish for
Yeah.
basically just yelling at the ref in like the
Correct.
90 plus mark. And
Yep.
that was the like deciding point. Otherwise we were tied.
Yeah. I I will be honest with you. I was actually messaging with Wojo during that game because I was at the game with my husband. And as soon as that yellow card happened, he messaged me and said, I lost it. And I was like, there's no way that can't be true. And to hear it come from you,
The
obviously,
the
it
only
was.
the only difference between our rosters, I think, in the West Coast games was I had Evander and he had Rusnak.
Yeah.
That was a lone
Rough.
difference because everybody was pretty set on chalk the last few weeks of the year
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really came down to the wire. Thank you. I just got a wine delivery. Cheers.
Dang, lucky.
Um, I know. I have a great spouse. What is this? This is a broader question, but what is your approach? You just talked about last minute tinkering and things like that, but what is your
uh,
approach to setting a fantasy team? How do you go about it each week?
yeah, it's probably different than most. I typically don't even. Let me back up. I'll clear my roster from the week prior, and the first thing I do with all 15 is set it for players from the final game, so I don't accidentally lock somebody from the first
Hot
game for the
tip.
next week. Because that used to happen more often than I would hope it would.
Yeah.
Um, and then when I'm ready to, I don't typically start building my team out until the first lineups drop on
Okay.
either Wednesday or Saturday. And then from there, I just start looking at what players would look enticing, and if they are they a bench? Are they a start? Try to make sure you really leverage the auto ruse to the max
Yeah.
capacity
Yeah.
as the game allows. And then it just kind of blends out from there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I
Yeah.
miss on players that are higher picked. I mean, the current ownership piece kind of falls by the wayside by like week 3 or 4 of the
Yeah.
season.
Yeah.
But I tend to build my roster out late just because
Nice.
I was telling Reed
I
earlier,
envy
I just
that.
don't like
I don't
I don't
have
like
that
over
option.
I don't like overthinking it if I can avoid it.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. I'd like you to say that louder for the people in the back. I feel like we talk about that a lot, right? Just the overthinking aspect. Do you ever mirror what I like to do, which is even before I now there's sometimes I'll just throw a player like Messi or someone in right away when I'm resetting, but do you
sure.
like to look at the schedule That's something I always like to do.
Yeah,
I tend to glance at the games and
sure.
then move to the. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. I mean, glance at schedule to see like what offensive players are likely going to
Hmm.
be a better pick versus like what offenses are
Sure.
slumping. Therefore, are you
Yeah.
kind of checking out like goalies and defenders?
Yep.
Um, yeah,
What defenses are at home? Do I like that home matchup?
paying. I will just call out like the weather warnings, especially as we
Hmm.
get towards the back half of the year.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think it's Asher that does weather, so I'll just call him out now.
Yes.
Or Storminator, I think is his name currently in
Yeah.
the Discord. Just I would give him a shout out because the weather warnings are massive. Um,
I mean, they've come into play big time last season and
they
previous seasons as well.
I I felt like I avoided any of the major weather catastrophes by just
Hmm.
not picking guys where there's a high chance that they're going to get, you
Yeah.
know, lightninged out. A couple
Yep.
years ago, that was definitely an issue because
Oh
I
yeah.
would try to just shrug it off, and the next thing you know, your guy's locked and there's no game.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. What what is your approach? We talk about this every season, and I think generally Reed and I have a we'll pick the best players. However, and I know we'll get into this in player picks because you and I overlapped a lot. So I feel like I maybe already know the answer to this question, but how do you approach price rising? Does that matter to you? Does your bank value matter these first couple weeks? Do you try to have no scrubs? Do you try to only have a keeper scrub? What's your
I
strategy when it comes to that price rise?
I definitely would recommend for the first 4 or 5 weeks
Mhm.
avoid doing scrubs if at all possible. Like set your
Same.
$4 to $5 guys on the bench. Try to always have a set starting 11. You can put one scrub in case one of
Hmm.
your someone in your on your bench pops, but otherwise really try to push the price rise as quick as possible, even if it means you might be sacrificing a couple points here or there. um
Yeah.
I mean I would, for instance, by like week 2 or 3, I would venture to pick a $5 guy where I'm assuming he's at best going to score like, I don't know, a 5, maybe a 6, versus use the additional money to again get somebody who might only score a 5 or a 6, but they cost more, so they're not going to get the same value out of
Yep.
budget. I would say by probably week 6 or 7 last year, I never had to look at budget. I could just pick the
Yeah.
most
Same.
expensive guys through the entire game, and then that was
Yeah.
that. I Reed was saying earlier that you had a pretty high budget last year. Do you recall what it was?
Gosh, I can't remember how I ended. It was not quite as high as someone else I'd seen, but
I dug
yes,
through the
I had an obnoxious budget. But it wasn't because I was
at
trying.
that
I
point
just
you're
kind of
yeah, like after
yeah,
the
I
first
was
four or
doing
five
what
weeks, you just let it
yes,
ride
but I was doing what you said where I try to never have a scrub if I can help
if
it the first
possible.
5 weeks. Yeah, if it's possible with rotated keepers or injuries to a back line. Defense is usually the best place to find them, but like you said, I'll take a 6.0, 5.5 mid this week and throw them on my bench to avoid having to have a scrub. Um, I honestly contribute that. I think I had an obnoxious budget because I peaked early last year, which is it's usually the opposite. I like slide into top 50, but last year I think I was like 12 after week 1 or something. So it was just more of like my players hit, right? Yeah, Reed would get pretty annoyed. He kept saying the word budget like at the midway point, and I was like, who cares? And so
The
I can't
people
I
joining
have
the
to look.
game midway through the year.
I'd have
I
to
will
look, but yeah, Tyler and I were often Ranch Tanner and I were often collaborating on whose budget was bigger, no pun intended.
sure.
Yeah.
I finished at 2. I had to go back in the Discord and look. I finished at 211.2 last year.
Yeah, I'd have to look. I don't know if I still have
Yeah,
it.
you stopped. You
I will
stopped
do
telling us your budget in the rundown, so I looked real quick and it's not there.
Yeah, I definitely stopped telling you because you got mad at me.
I did no such thing.
Uh, um okay. How do you go about stats? What resources do you besides us, obviously? Habitual listener, I'm sure. But what resources and stats do you, if any, do you like to utilize each week?
Um, resources and stats. I mean, it really just take 10 minutes, scan through on, I don't know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever is comfortable. Take 10 minutes and just
Yeah,
scan through games and just go look and be like, who looks like an anomaly in
sure.
terms of where their score was at. Obviously, if somebody scores like 15 plus, unless it's
Yeah,
Messi, that's probably not going to be the standard for them,
right.
right? But
Yeah,
try to look for the guy that's got a 7 or an 8. And if you know a clean sheet's busted and all of a sudden you see a defender higher, why? Did he pick up a
mm-hmm.
bunch of bonus points
Mm-hmm.
somewhere? Did he score? Was it an assist? Using the last 3-week average is
Yeah,
sometimes helpful because you can filter by position and see if there's any names that kind of seem out of place. You mentioned it before. Pay attention to schedule. Like look at the upcoming schedule to see is there
mm-hmm.
anybody where the dots start to align. Um, in the toolbox in the Discord, I'm going to keep using the Discord as a reference. Paying attention to
Absolutely.
like injuries or international duty, um, potentially any yellow card accumulations or red cards, weather issues. There's a variety of things that you can look at that really shouldn't take more than like, I don't know, 15 minutes.
Yeah,
Doesn't have to be like a massive deep dive, but just something I would say if there's anything I do pre team building is the midweek point. Pay attention to like any card accumulations, any knocks people might have picked up.
sure.
It usually gets called out with any players that are more frequently picked just in the Discord in general.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I would say those are like the main things I'm usually looking at in terms of resources.
Okay. To wrap up the, you know, OR1 reigning OR1 pitch, what advice do you have for anybody who either is just playing this year or playing for the first time this year?
First thing I put in the notes, just have fun. Like
Yeah.
for me, the biggest part is it's fun to talk smack with other people that are doing the same thing,
And I hope you are. I hope
whether
you
you're
did,
good
and
at
I
it
hope
or you're
you
not.
are. Yeah.
I will say I tried to stay more reserved so I didn't have constant quotes come flying back
Mm-hmm.
down the stretch. I think I overtook the overall one spot like 9 or 10 weeks before the season ended. I want to say it was like game week 22 or 23.
Yeah.
And then from there the league kind of fluctuated. So I definitely was trying to take more of the quiet and reserved approach versus
Sure.
flaunt it, because the next thing you know, you make a couple bad picks and then everybody piles on you. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel great.
Mm-hmm. No. Well, awesome. Like I said, I'm so glad that we were able to have you on week one as the reigning champ. I know heavy is the crown. So I appreciate you hopping on, to chat with us, especially for someone, we get this a lot. Um, we try to make a very educated guess of a team. I think Reed and I both try to always say, don't hold us to this. Like if you're playing us in a head to head or something and our team's different, we're not here like spouting incorrect teams. It's just what on Monday we think makes the most sense, and sometimes it changes. But I
Sure.
always appreciate when people come on like you who don't glance at it for 4 more days and we make you do it on a Monday. So I appreciate it very much.
I mean, because part of the problem is like if you really invest time into it to set your team on Monday or Tuesday,
Yeah.
and then comes, either Wednesday if there's a double game week or Saturdays, and then all of a sudden you see 2 or 3 of your guys that you already had set are out, and maybe those
Yeah.
are your budget players. Now you're having to panic to find other budget players or figure out where you're going to move people
Mm-hmm.
around,
Mm-hmm.
and it throws you off. I
Yeah.
prefer to just look at a lineup and be like, that lineup looks absolutely rotated. They look
Yeah.
terrible. I'm going to dive in against them.
See, I love that. That's more of a gut strategy, which is something that I don't let drive me, but I really try to heavily look at less of the build up computer data. I always call it computer data, and people like, Christian and Reed kind of smile and laugh at me, but less of that data and more of a, like you said,
Just a gut
that
check.
person's out of position. Yes, exactly. Just a gut check. Exactly. So I love that.
Yeah, and that's why we also talk about, again, with the Discord, where we have the channel where the rosters and the lineups get posted and just all aggregated right there. I mean, it's
Mhm.
super
Yeah.
important to see that. We know that sometimes it's hard. We do have players from other areas of the world, not in the United States, that make that, and Canada make that more difficult. But we try.
Sometimes you go on a European trip in the summer and someone has to
Exactly.
run your team for you
Ex-
because the time zones are too hard.
Exactly. But no, it's great advice, and yeah, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts, Jeff. Thanks, Ashley, for taking over. We had a minor
Yeah.
malfunction with an electric cat water fountain, so
I
Uh-oh.
don't even know where to go with that.
had well,
Too many
it's
choices.
it's all good now. But yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and I hope everyone enjoyed getting some of these insights for Jeff as we're kicking off round 1 of the season. But what you really came for, what we're going to be getting into next is, even though it's hard for Jeff, we're going to be talking about the players who we're targeting on Monday getting into this weekend's game.